You can see this position on the board. It is between Botvinnik and Alekhine. Both of the players were former world champions. And here I want to, teach you how to approach this kind of position. So there are few important things that you should do. First of all, every time you see a new position, anybody sees a new position every single time, you must follow scanning technique. It is like a general recommendation. You should follow scanning technique every time you see any position. Doesn't matter if it is your game or opponent game, whichever game is being analyzed. After the opening is completed, we should always apply scanning technique because we should realize where are we headed. So if we apply scanning technique, we realize that both the kings are relatively safe. Okay, blacks is not theoretically safe because there's a minor piece missing, but okay, knight d7, knight f6 can be played. And regarding pieces, now here it is one position where you will learn that how the strong players, they just see very minute differences in the quality of pieces, in the quality of pawn structure, and they emphasize on that. They kind of build up their advantage on that. So in this particular case, we see that both the queens are kind of fine. White queen is having open diagonal, open file. Black queen also has open diagonal, open file. Sir, can you change the piece set? It is hard to see. Okay, wait one moment. Sorry about that. So I'll keep it to the basic piece setup. I guess this is fine here. Okay, so what I was saying was that both the queens are relatively fine. They are of equal value, we can say, because they are controlling open files each and open diagonals. Regarding the rook, we see that the opponent rook is very passive rook. It is blocked by a pawn. But white rook is slightly passive. It means if we have to compare rooks, we can say that white rook is better than black rook. Okay, so we can say that white rook is slightly better. Now, whichever are better pieces, we'll highlight in green color, and the bad pieces I'll highlight in red color. So now comes about the knight. Now our knight has jumping squares, knight d5, knight g5. So knight is good. Their knight, right now they cannot go to c6, but they can go to d7. Okay. So what Botvinnik did, Botvinnik understood that if I can stop the knight from going to d7, it will also become a bad piece. And he went for the next idea, which is queen c7, rook c7. And now we can see that in this endgame, the knight is better than opponent's knight. Rook is better than opponent's rook. Now, let's talk about pawns. So usually, if we see the pawns right now, we can see that on the king side, the structure is same. On the center, the structure is same. But on the queen side, even though it looks like the structure is same, it is not. Can anybody tell me why? There's one small difference, and you will see how this difference plays a important role in the following moves. The black pawns are one square advanced. It means that there is one extra weak square, which is a hole. Hole is present on d6. Okay, hole is also present on d3. So this is identical hole. There is no hole present on king side from both sides. But on the queen side, there is no hole present for white, but there is one hole present for black. So we can see there is extra weakness that is on the queen side. And in endgame, it plays an important role. Now, how many of you like, by the way, before I start teaching this position, how many of you like playing end games? How many of you feel that you are able to outplay your opponent in end games? Okay, Krishna says middle game. Okay. Now, what about others? Do you guys feel more comfortable in end game, middle game, or opening? So you should understand that endgame is more about technique. Opening is more about theory. Okay, you have to remember a lot of variations. Middle game is about scanning technique. How are you handling close positions, prophylaxis, everything. But end game is about the right technique. Okay, you should remember, you should understand what kind of pieces are involved, what kind of pawn structure is we are playing, and you have to understand what kind of technique should we follow. So in end games are based on four fundamentals. Okay, number one, activity of your pieces, whichever pieces you are playing with, and your king. Another important fundamental is inactivity of opponent pieces and opponent king. Third is attacking their weak pawns. Now, once I say that you have to attack their weak pawns, you should understand that sometimes weak pawns will be present, sometimes weak pawns will not be present. And you have to learn to make pawns weak. We'll discuss that in today's session. And the fourth important thing is creating passed pawns. Whichever side you're having majority, try to have passed pawns and start pushing it. Because the more you push your passed pawns, and the moment passed pawn enter in the opponent's territory, majority of the focus will be going towards the passed pawn. Okay. So here we see that endgames are of endgame depends on four fundamentals. Like for example, middle game, at least close position middle game depends on scanning technique and prophylaxis. Endgame depends on four fundamentals: activity of king and pieces, inactivity of opponent king and pieces, attacking weak pawns of the opponent, and creating passed pawns for yourself. So here we realize that okay, let me just remove some colors. We realize that at this particular point, this pawn, both the pawns are on d5 and d4, both the pawns are weak. So one side will try to always attack these weaknesses. Another important thing is the b6 pawn is already a weak pawn. So we can realize that regarding the pawns, there's already weak pawns present. But what about pieces? So our rook is active. Their rook is not active, but it can get active very quickly by going rook e8 or maybe pawn f6, rook e8. But the main thing is about knights. So this endgame is more about your knight, white's knight versus black's knight. Active knight, better knight versus worse knight. Okay. And you will see whenever knights are involved in the endgames, pawns become very important. So it is my recommendation that if you have to learn about pawns, if you have to learn about how to create weak pawns, how to create passed pawns, how to understand weak structures, strong structures, see more knight endgames. Okay, it will really help you to learn about pawns. Why? Because suppose, just to give you a random idea, if I play f6, suddenly what happens? My knight becomes passive. Okay, so pawns, they make knights passive. So pawns act as restriction, as we understood this concept restriction in the one of the middle game classes. And we understood that if the knight is on sitting on g6, g3, b6, b3, and if the pawn can be pushed on, let's say if the knight is on g3, if the pawn can be pushed on g6, the knight is very passive. So pawns create knights, pawns make the knight passive. Okay, so that's why whenever you play with knight or when the opponent has a knight, make sure you're able to push your pawns on good squares so that they don't allow the knight to jump. Okay, so here black plays a move pawn to f6. Now with pawn f6, now you can understand the logic that white's knight was very active. And by playing f6, what black has done is they have created this passivity on white's knight. Now they don't have any clear jumping square. Okay, but that's part of the game, okay? Because their knight is also passive. Our knight is also kind of passive in nature right now. But at least our knight can maneuver here and there and try to become active. Another very important feedback is whenever pawns are pushed to make opponent's knight passive, they also create drawback. So whenever pawns are pushed, they also in turn create drawbacks. Like for example, here, the moment f7 to f6 has been pushed, e6 has become a new weak square. Okay. So what I'll try to show you here is that with the correct technique, Botvinnik was able to push his pawns, also create his weaknesses as drawbacks, but black was not able to exploit them. And when black pushed his pawn to make white knights passive, the drawbacks that black created, how white exploited. So this is again a very important topic for today's session. Now here, white played the move king f1 because we should always try to bring the king in the game. And black played rook f7. Now, whenever an offer of exchange is there, please understand, not every exchange, even equal value exchange is not equal. It always benefits one side more and other side less. Now here, write me in the chat, after rook f7, should white take it? Should white take the rook or should white not take the rook? Think about it and write me in the chat, yes or no. You should think like this. If rook f7, king f7 happens, no, because our knight will be passive and their knight can go to c6. Very good. So here I have received an answer that if we go rook f7, king f7, the point is that their knight can start getting developed. So we should not exchange the rooks, okay? Now, what we should do instead? So here, we should move the rook somewhere on the c file only, okay? Now, at this point, we should go either rook to c3 or rook c1 or rook c2, somewhere like that. But remember, those who have taken the class of rook lifts, I have always told that when you play with the rooks, you should always try to keep it on the third rank so that you are having this flexibility. Should you attack b3 by going rook b3, rook a3, should you attack b6, a6, whatever, you can decide like that. If you go rook c2, you're not having flexibility now. But another very important feedback of mine is, when you are trying to go from point A to point B in the end game, make sure first of all you give one intermediate check and then go to point B. Like for example, if I want to go from c7 to c3, do not go there directly. Always, it is general recommendation. First give a check, they will go back and then come back to c3. See the difference. See why am I saying that? You go give a check, he goes back, you go back to c3. Now, the problem is that if they again play a move like, let's say, king f7, we again go for a check. They go here, now it is our turn. And we can start improving our pieces. It is not their turn. So after rook to c3, he goes c5. Why is he doing that? Try to pay attention on every pawn move that is made in the game. From white side also, from black side also. So with g5, they're trying to make sure that our knight is not having any jumping square. Okay, so they're trying to restrict our knight. But as I have said before, every time you push pawn, every time you make a pawn move, you will create weaknesses. So when g5 is being played, you can see f5, h5 are new weaknesses, correct? They are new holes. Now, how should we continue? So our knight is passive, it needs improvement. So write me one idea, how can we improve the knight, guys? Write me in the chat. Everybody write, okay? So that you understand, this is very important, that when you play against knights, your knight versus opponent knight, pawns become very important. And to understand end game, you have to understand pawns. Okay? In middle game, usually I say play with pieces. But in end game, pawns become very important because pieces are so less, you cannot only depend on pieces. You have to make sure that you are able to attack their weak pawns, create fast pawns. Knight e1, knight c2, knight e3. Yes, very good. So, Srinjoy, I like this plan. Knight to e1, knight to c2, knight to e3, knight f5. Now, another very important point I want to make sure you guys understand this. See, with knight e1, once we play this move, knight e1, at the back of the head, like in back of the head, we are thinking that, okay, we should go knight c2, knight e3, knight f5. But we should not only restrict ourselves in this manner. For example, suppose if they play a move like f5, suddenly the drawback is e5, right? So we are keeping this flexibility in our mindset that we can now go to knight to d3, probably knight to b4, or knight to e5. Okay, so knight e1 was played, and now black plays h5. Okay, so far so good. Everybody is able to follow? Yes or no? Okay, so here let's try to see what happens. Now after h4, sorry, after h5, what is black trying to do? So black is trying to advance. Okay, black is trying to advance the king side pawns. Now please understand one thing. As I said, there are 4 pillars of endgame. Okay, there are 4 pillars of endgame: activity, inactivity, weak pawn, and passed. Now we'll try to understand how to create weak pawns. Here you will learn a very nice move from white. Okay, and why you should learn technique. Technique is very important in endgame, because once you see this move, you will be able to quickly apply it in your own endgames. If this kind of situation, if the opponent is pushing too many pawns on one side, you can quickly understand that, okay, if I play this move pawn to h4, it is a temporary sacrifice. But the moment they take here, guys, what is the point? The point is, now you are having so many targets. Like you go knight d3, just to make some move, knight f4, and now let's see the targets. Everything is a target. Every single thing is a target on the right side of the board. Okay. So, and if they play something like g4, now we can again understand that after knight to d3, knight to f4, there are still targets. So whenever you try to push the pawn, whenever opponent pushes the pawn, they cannot go back. That is the problem. That pawns don't go back. And the weaknesses that get created whenever a pawn is pushed, those weaknesses are permanent in nature, especially in the endgame. All right. So h4 is a temporary pawn sacrifice. If it is taken, you go knight d3, knight f4, and suddenly you have created so many weak pawns that black will not be able to defend everything. All right. So he goes knight d7. Now the next move played by Botvinnik is very simple, because knight c7, they're trying to improve the knight, so we quickly attack it. Okay, we have to make sure that knight should not be improved. And now he goes rook f7. Now, I will give you guys 2 minutes to think. Suggest me a new move from white. Suggest me a next move from white. How should white approach this position? Write me only 0.5 move. Very good, Srinjoy. Srinjoy, do you mind also writing the explanation? Why do you choose that move? It is a very nice move. But write me, why are you also choosing that move? Very good, Srinjoy. So this is correct. Your thinking process is correct. Very good. Now, let me explain the thought process. Remember what I said, that endgame depends on 4 pillars. So you have to create more weaknesses, right? Now, there's move suggested is rook c8. One move is suggested is rook c8. Now, so let me tell you, if you want to go somewhere from the rook, if you want to go somewhere from c7 with the rook, only then give a check and then go to it. So after rook to c8 check, king e7, there is no way the rook will again participate, right? Rook is not attacking anything. And if you go somewhere like rook to a7 and pawn to a5, again, in my opinion, the rook is not doing much, right? So right now, rook is able to control the c files. It can always come back to c3 and switch. But if you go rook a7, then we are fixing our rook. Okay, so rook a7, pawn a5, pawn a4. It is clear that b5 has become a weakness. But a rook, I will again have to waste a move. So I'll again have to come to rook c7, and then it will be black stance. Okay, so here we should not think of a rook move, because rook is already participating. When we pull the knight back on e1, the knight is not participating at all. So we have to see how will the knight participate, because their knight is now not so better, but it has improved from the 8th rank at least. It is still passive, by the way. It is still blocked on b6, f6, e5, c5. So knight is still passive. So here white played a very nice move, knight to f3. back. He played knight e1, then he played knight f3 back. Why? Because he's saying make a decision. He's forcing black to make a decision on the pawn. If you push the pawn, now remember, when the pawn is pushed, it cannot come back, right? So now what is the drawback? So again, we can come back. And again, then knight d3, knight f4 is a problem. Okay. So see, these kind of slow moves, not going for quick attack, just playing the position step by step by step. And this is what I always say. If your opponent has no idea to attack you, do not start the attack directly on the opponent, because the moment you start the attack, you give them an idea to defend. But if your opponent has already an idea to attack you, then do not wait. Quickly go and attack. Here, black has no idea to attack white. So white should just keep improving. So he goes pawn f5. Now with pawn f5, we go knight d3 because we want to go e5 we can go, or f4 we can go, or we can also go b4. There's so many choices now, guys. He goes pawn f4. Now, again, let's stop. Now think, what should white play again? Write me again half a move, only half a move, no variation, nothing. Or you can write me one or two candidate moves as well. See, what should you do as white? Okay, so Srinjay, first of all, I'll discuss your move. You've suggested knight to b4. It is a move which is fine. But see, what is the problem? It looks like you're attacking weak pawns. But remember what I said. Endgame depends on four fundamentals: activity of your pieces. At the same time, opponent pieces should be inactive. Opponent pieces should not be able to participate. If you go knight b4, so what black will say? Black will say, fine, you know what? I'll sacrifice the pawn, take the a pawn if you want to, because your knight will be in the corner. Take the a pawn if you want to, exchange the rooks with me, and I will try to activate my knight at least. And I'll be only down a pawn. So if you say no, I deny. I go here. And now you say, fine, let me have the pawn for free, because a free pawn is a free pawn. And now here black will play f3. See why? Takes. And after the move rook e7, rook here, you'll be able to get the pawn back eventually. Okay. And in this position, if you go here, I go here, and this position is a draw. It is a theoretical draw, because there's a center passed pawn for black. You do have queenside majority. You do have your upper pawn, but the black side is also very active. The knight can now participate very easily. Okay. So this is very important, that we should not give away the advantage. What was white's original advantage? That black's knight was not participating. So what you did with knight b4, you helped black actually to participate with the knight. Okay. So not knight b4. Now this is where, when I show you moves, when I show you the moves of strong players, try to see and try to learn from them. Try to understand that why strong players are so calm, and try to see their moves. You will learn that their moves are also very subtle in nature. White played the move f3. And after gf3, even if knight f6 happens, where is the knight going? Are you understanding what I'm saying, all of you guys? So if you can do any move, maybe in 2 moves later, 3 moves later, like we can again go knight b4, no? We can again go knight b4. So when we can do something, maybe 2 moves later, 3 moves later, we should not do it immediately. When we can do some capture, maybe 2 moves later, 3 moves later, we should not do that capture immediately. If I want to go and attack some pawn, and it can be done maybe 2 moves, 3 moves later, we should not do that immediately. Immediately, we should see that, can I restrict the opponent knight? So this is very important in today's session, and we are learning how to use pawns to restrict knights. Now the threat is to go knight b4, obviously. So he goes a5. Now see the drawback. What has been the drawback with a5? So how can we try to take advantage? Everybody in the chat. And now the drawback of a5 is b5 has become weak. Okay, so whenever there's a weakness that gets created, ideally you should fix the weakness. Okay, so now everything is under control. All these squares are under control. Look at this. King f8. Now, question is, what should white do? Again, write in the chat. How should white proceed? See, which piece is not doing anything? Which piece is not? So now the knight has improved because knight is attacking the pawn. Okay, now the knight has improved. So here, what you should do is, you should see that a piece, if it is attacking something, if it is attacking a weak pawn, then that piece is useful in the endgame. In the middle game, rooks like to have open file. In the end game, if they are not attacking anything on the file, they are useless. Okay? Rooks like to have open file, bishop like to have open diagonal in the middle game. But in the end game, if suppose in one diagonal the bishop is open, totally open, no piece is there. In the other diagonal is not totally open. There's a weak pawn. So bishop will be more happy in the diagonal in which the opponent is having a weak pawn. So what I'm trying to say is, in middle game, what works in middle game doesn't work in end game. That's why there's a concept in endgame called seventh heaven, because we try to control the open file in the middle game so that we are able to enter the seventh heaven or seventh rank in the end game, because most of the backward pawns are present on the seventh heaven or seventh rank. So in end game, your pieces must attack weak pawns. Okay, so white played the move rook to c6. Now he's having options. He can go rook h6. If the knight moves, rook b6. Okay, and also he can go rook d6, rook d5. So black played king e7. Probably it was kind of a move to stop rook to d6. And now, very nicely, here we can see the next move, king f2. Now this is where you can understand that they are just playing. White is just playing with black's mind. It's like a psychological move. White is just saying, okay, you show me what you want to do. By the way, here rook h6 is also a move. You can also play rook h6. Idea, if they play rook f5, now just play king f2 again. Because the king cannot move, the knight cannot move, pawn will hang. Okay, they can play this.
Oh,
Probably.
yes, sir. Instead of like that, the rook going down, why don't we just go for knight f6 first?
Like this.
Yes, protects the
It,
pawn and not kind
now
of
what is the
traps.
drawback?
Ah, okay.
Okay. So here,
And you're losing the pawn also.
yeah. So here they go rook f5. And now we go king f2. Knight here. The drawback is now we go knight e5. And now everything is just fixed. Look at the rook. Cannot move a single square. The knight cannot move anywhere because b6 will hang. And look at this is called domination. Okay. Now if they go here, we just take. Simple. In the game, however, after a couple of moves, the white is just playing b3. Look at this move. White has already won the position, by the way. I'm just trying to tell you that how white is progressing. Let king here, king e2 now takes, and after a few moves, the game was over. Okay. So what I wanted to show you from this endgame was that how white was able to use pawns to make sure black pieces were not able to participate, especially the knight. So whenever there's a knight endgame, make sure that in a knight endgame, you use pawns. You try to push pawns so that you try to restrict the knight. Okay. This is why in knight endgame and pawn structures, they should be taught simultaneously so that you are understanding about weak pawns and understanding about structures. You're understanding about how a pawn, whenever a pawn is moving, it creates drawback and how opponent is able to control the drawback. So, okay, Srinjoy, can you explain us what was the summary of this entire endgame between Botvinnik and Alekhine?
We learned how to restrict pawns with knights. We also learned different techniques on how to play knight end games.
Okay.
We also learn the four major parts of an endgame: activity, inactivity, weak pawns, and pass pawns.
Very good. And there was one
If
technique also to make a weak pawn. Do you remember that move when he played h4?
yes, H4 or F3.
H4. F3 was played to restrict the knight. See, I'll go back. When he played h4, this move.
Oh
When
yeah,
he
F3
played the
was
move,
yeah. When was H4?
a temporary sacrifice, right?
Yes.
Because the moment this sacrifice is accepted, all three pawns become weak. Okay. This is where I will share this in assignment as well. So you'll be having to play this entire, okay, you'll be playing this position as white.